Absolute Bane just destroyed Absolute Batman without breaking a single sweat. And we're about to break down the entire issue right here, right now. So to recap Absolute Batman issue 8, just in case your memory is betraying you, we saw Bruce being dragged throughout the hallways of V-Corps by the one and only Mr. Freeze until being locked away inside of a freeze chamber where he was supposed to spend the next 30 years burning in agony. But thanks to some motivation coming from a heartfelt conversation he had recently had with his friends, Bruce eventually escaped the ice-cold freeze chamber by using his Batcast to shatter the glass with many batarangs, allowing him to confront Freeze just moments later, but not before we found out that Freeze had been dispersing synthetic snow all over Gotham City that could upload people's genetic profiles to a database upon coming in contact with their skin. Now, unfortunately, the exchange between him and Bruce quickly grew too overwhelming for Bruce to handle when he released his comrades from their ice chambers like a pack of wild attack dogs. So in order to stay alive, Bruce was forced to flee the scene by smashing through a wall and using his bat tendrils to glide to safety, where he'd then reach out to his good friend Waylon to warn him about what was in the snow and so that they could meet up together later. But shortly after their phone call ended, things took a turn for the worse when Waylon was gagged unconscious by a group of sketchy looking men who expressed intentions of taking him to Ark M because his genetic profile was perfect for some sort of experiment, implying that we'll probably be getting Absolute Killer Croc soon. Issue number 9, on the other hand, doesn't pick up right where we left off and instead gives us an introduction to Absolute Bane right from the get-go, with leaders from 2 separate countries who have been at war negotiating a peace treaty while indicating how the war has impacted their personal lives. One of them had lost their grandfather in the bloodshed and then later on their father, and the other one had lost all of his sons only a month ago. But now they were sure that a bright future was right around the corner, agreeing that enough was enough and that tomorrow they'd announce their new partnership, which would leave behind memorable legacies of peace. However, upon wrapping up their conversation and making their way out of the building, the two of them noticed a massive puddle of blood spilling in through the exit, followed by none other than Bane literally walking through the wall because he didn't fit in through the door and then apologizing for interrupting their meeting. It's here that Bane sarcastically expresses how excited he was upon hearing whispers of them negotiating peace, which is why he was so heartbroken to find out that one of them decided to betray the other and kill them during negotiations, which plunged their countries back into war. And obviously they didn't actually do that last part because they're both alive, but Bane was basically threatening one of them to betray the other because if they chose not to, he'd just kill both of them. So the older leader, Omar, struck by fear and consumed by panic, ended up folding very quickly, which resulted in Bane lifting the other guy up into the air by his face and squashing his head in the palm of his hand like a bug. After that though, somehow the tension continued escalating, with Bane grabbing Omar by his neck and demanding that he give a speech later today, declaring that they needed to ramp up operations and escalate the war even if his people were completely against it. And then to wrap up our first impression of Bane, he'd then get a phone call from a mystery someone stating that he needed to get to Gotham City as soon as possible. The story then jumps over to a Batman bloodbath narrated by Alfred Pennyworth, because Waylon had been missing for 2 weeks now, which sent Bruce on a relentless rampage where it seemed like he was possessed. According to Alfred, he was so unhinged that he took down every single one of the Maronis and Falcones, and last night he took down so many people that the hospital literally ran out of ambulances, so they were forced to resort to ride-sharing and biking victims to the emergency room, just like we see Dick Grayson doing in this panel, which is our first confirmed appearance of him in the Absolute universe. Anyways, as we soldier forward, our story switches things over to Jim Gordon's daughter Barbara warming up some dinner during a phone call with her father about how the city is still on lockdown after the Black Mask incident. But after their conversation ended, she was thrown into defense mode as an unfamiliar voice began calling her name from the other room. Soon enough, she'd realize it was Batman though, speaking through the helmet he lost while running away from her in issue 5 and indicating that he needed her help with something. Shortly after that, they were face to face at Gotham Zoo, with Barbara holding a folder of information as Bruce asked her where his friend Waylon was. However, Barbara refused to answer him until he told her why he chose to meet with her out of all the other cops in the department. So Bruce remarked he had seen her in action before, stating that she was one of the good cops. But the matter at hand was more important than that, so he needed to know who took Waylon immediately, which is when Barbara revealed that it was them and that the file claimed Waylon was breaking curfew on city lockdown. Nevertheless, the story then switches things over to Bruce, his friends, and Alfred, planning on how they were going to get Waylon back, and all of them were extremely angry because the file Barbara gave Bruce Bruce also noted that he was being taken to Ark M, one of 12 black sites where some very sketchy and bad things were happening, which was why they needed to get him out of there as soon as possible. As stated by Ozzy though, it didn't make sense how all of this was happening so fast because the groundwork for Ark M was only laid down a few months ago. However, Bruce and Harvey were certain that that wasn't the case, revealing they recently discovered that in the 1800s there was a hospital on Ark M's island, but when it eventually burned down, JK Industries bought the land, and private records verified they'd been working on Ark M ever since. So what was believed to be the newest Ark was actually the oldest. On the bright side though, Bruce and the gang had obtained some blueprints, and from what they could tell, the new structure was still using most of the piping and ventilation from the original hospital, so Bruce was pretty sure they had a way inside, but he needed Eddie to make something capable of disabling cameras and alarms if he wanted to get inside safely. After that, Bruce also implied that they need a way to keep Waylon safe once they retrieved him, so Harvey exclaimed he could get witness protection to watch over him in Metropolis. Believing they were in over their heads though, Ozzy asked them if they were listening to how crazy they sounded because there was so much to take in and come to terms with. But while smashing the table in half, Bruce expressed that it didn't matter how crazy they sounded, implying that this is what they asked for when they told him that they wanted him to be honest about Batman. To which Ozzy responded, "Look man, I was just saying that it's crazy. I wasn't saying that we shouldn't do it." After that, the story jumps over to Commissioner Gordon, who is now moving out of his office with Martha after losing the election to Mayor Hill, while watching a news reporter claim that Mayor Hill has now announced that Gotham will stay on curfew indefinitely while him and Commissioner Bullock ramp up the police's forces. Disheartened to hear this, Martha then insinuated that they needed to do something about it. However, Commissioner Gordon begged to differ, stressing that it was over and that there was nothing they could really do after losing his position in office. He didn't mean completely over though, he just meant his time in the chair was over, and that he now believed it was Martha's turn to make a big move on Gotham, whether it was running for mayor or some other city position, because she had always had his back and supported him over the years, so now it was his turn to support her. After that, the plot thickens as we transition over to an intimate flashback of Bruce and Selina getting frisky on a pile of cash. Moments later though, the naked spiciness was put to a halt when Waylon began slamming on the door to be let inside because he had a huge announcement. So Bruce undid the latch and let him in, and immediately upon doing so, Waylon ecstatically revealed his latest opportunity, indicating he was just given a shot to fight for the title against Bibbo Bobowski, and he wanted Bruce to be his trainer for the fight even though he knew a bunch of guys who were better than Bruce because he was his best friend. The two of them then began taking playful jabs at one another out of excitement for this big news, and then we realized that Bruce was pondering on this memory while putting on diving gear in preparation to sneak into Ark M. Before submerging into the ocean depths though, Alfred asked him to listen to him because he needed to tell him something very important, but Bruce was growing increasingly impatient, stating that he needed to go immediately. So Alfred just said good luck, and then we see Bruce being shot out of his submarine dump truck at the bottom of Ark M's island. As relayed by Alfred, Bruce was moving extremely fast, making it inside the main cavern in less than an hour, and from there he just kept swimming higher and higher until reaching the main pipeline. Soon enough, Bruce was ready to make his entrance, confirming that he was near the entry point. But upon hearing this, Alfred was a bit puzzled, claiming that Bruce was far too low and at least 100 meters beneath the prison. But Bruce was positive he was right where he needed to be because he could see lights off into the distance. So he continued cutting his way inside until reaching a vent where he made an absolutely shocking reveal with Alfred asking him what he was seeing, to which Bruce replied the real Ark M while looking down at a massive underground city. It's then and there that Bruce leaps off of the pipes, gliding down to the surface without hesitation as Alfred desperately tried telling him to stop. But unfortunately their comms stopped working because Bruce was way too low, resulting in Alfred feeling regretful for not telling Bruce what he wanted to tell him before he made his way into the water, because apparently he knew some of the things that were happening down there and that Gotham was somehow connected to a so-called bigger picture. A war that never ended, that had no rules, that he knew Bruce couldn't win despite how much faith he had. And while expressing all of this, Alfred begins sifting through photos of what seems to be a time when him and Deathstroke were partners, and some photos of Bane during the early days of being experimented on. Anyways, upon reaching the surface of the underground facility, Bruce started snooping around and investigating until stumbling upon what seems to be Man-Bat. He then tried calling out to Alfred to describe what he was seeing, but unfortunately their comms still weren't working, so there wasn't any response. So he continued looking around and seeing what he could find until none other than Bane himself was standing right in front of him, kicking him directly in the chest and luring him into a battle just shortly after. So Bruce tried taking the upper hand by hurling both of his bat tendrils into Bane's chest, but Bane was completely unaffected, insisting that Bruce gave it all he had and advanced forward. Unfortunately, Bane was extremely well versed in every fighting style that Bruce was using though, allowing him to read all of his attacks like a book while intricately pushing small pressure points on his body that rendered his arms completely limp and useless. And despite how gruesome things already were, Bane was just getting started, then clobbering Bruce with so much force that he flew into a nearby wall, and then rage baiting him to keep fighting because his legs were still functioning properly. But once again, Bruce was dismantled like nobody's business, with Bane using the exact same pressure point method to disable his right leg, followed by an insanely devastating blow straight to the jaw. Nevertheless, Bruce tried playing it cool and acting as if this fight could still go either way, calling Bane a juiced up freak and claiming that all he needed was one leg to put him down. However, Bane was 100% confident that this fight was only moments away from being finished, stating that he hadn't even used a drop of his juice yet and offering to give a demonstration of what it was capable of, which is exactly when his body began undergoing a horrific transformation where every inch of his body, including every muscle, expanded and expanded until he was literally like 30 feet tall. And after doing so, he then grabbed Bruce by his cowl, lifted him up into the air like he was a weightless ragdoll, and expressed that his name was Bane before indicating that it was time to prep Bruce for surgery. But sadly, that's where this issue comes to an end. But if you guys want to see what happens next, let me know in the comments down below.